Hello everybody, this is the Sequest Lifecycle kubeadm office hours. Today is the 25th of March 2020. I'm going to share the agenda document in chat. Please add your names to the list of participants and your agenda topics. Let me share my screen now. All right, let's see what we have. So the 118 release, let's start with new participants. Do we have anybody new? I don't see anybody new. Okay, PSAs, 118 was delayed apparently from yesterday. Sorry? 118 was delayed from yesterday because of some sort of issue related to the Kubernetes utils repository, and I think it's already fixed and the release is hopefully happening today, maybe. We are good. Documentation, PRs, everything is merged. So yeah, good to go. Going to the agenda topics, I wanted to propose whether we should have the planning session for 119 next week. I already spoke with Fabrizio. He said that today he's not going to be able to join, but maybe next week we can have this planning for the cycle. Any comments?
+1 for next week.
Okay, Rafael is also +1. Tim, would you be able to join next week?
Next week I should be able to, yes.
Okay. So I guess we have enough people to conduct the planning session. We can prioritize some of our items for this cycle and see how it goes. All right. So I added this because the next item, I added this for Ross and Rafa to discuss it, but I also participated in the same discussion. So basically we had too many comments in GitHub about this PR that Rafa sent. And I wanted us to finally discuss this on a meeting. To give some context about the PR, basically Rafa sent the PR to modify the way we do upgrades in terms of honoring the etcd tag version that is stored in the user config file on disk. And this is related to the -- config on upgrades. But this spawned a whole discussion about like how should we manage the etcd tag. And I logged some of the items that we might have to fix here. And also yesterday in the Sequest Lifecycle meeting, I spoke with Justin and with Daniel from kubeadm. And we somehow arrived to a conclusion that COPS is already doing something that kubeadm is also doing, but we are not doing it very well. So this is how we manage tags for etcd. So COPS, the way COPS is doing it, they basically, if the user applies a custom tag to etcd, they don't perform upgrades at all. Basically, this means that the user has to, if they want to perform an upgrade, the user has to go into the custom configuration, modify their tag, and manually deploy a new etcd. So this is basically one of the items that I want to discuss here. Basically, adding some context here also, the first item is we also have to resolve this. We currently are getting a warning because imagine that the GCR image has a -0 revision. Currently, kubeadm does not handle potential revision upgrades to -1. And the fix for that is fairly simple, I think. We just have to tolerate revisions But yeah, just open for discussion. Let's go through the items in order because I kind of messed this up in the introduction. So what do you think about the GCR revision problem?
So I'm thinking here that probably because we are actually using an image to spin up etcd, probably an image revision is always good to have. And as we can see, the GCR images already have one. And probably additional distributors such as SUSE, VMware, or whatever are going to attach their own revision numbers to the image. So I think that we should uh, tolerate those and at least try to cope with them.
I agree with that. I think the revision number is important. So you really know what kind of patch, not only the patch level, but what kind of patches do you have on top of that patch level. Maybe some CVs fixed, things like that, or maybe some custom patches. So I think that's useful. The problem that I see with our logic is that maybe we are getting too much into the details. I don't know if this is what you intend, Lubomir, but is that we are comparing something like this with the full context with the metadata and so on, with what etcd provides as a runtime, that the etcd runtime doesn't have this information. I don't know if this is a defect when building etcd. So if etcd also reported this as well on the runtime information, we will be comparing the same kind of tags. But since this is stripped on the etcd runtime at the moment, then we are comparing different things at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. And my proposal here is to basically just always compare only tags, which is easily implementable in the stacked etcd case, since we can actually query the static pods for the images that they're using and extract the tags from there. But it's not that easy to do in the external etcd case. But the external etcd case is only used like when we actually do an upgrade plan, and we in particular use a sort of a like side effect of it. Basically, the code there actually goes in and checks all of the etcd nodes, and it will error out if there is a version mismatch between the etcd node versions. So I think that we should probably stop outputting at least that information about its external etcd during upgrade plan. So at least that's my take on it.
I agree with that. Also, one question, Lubomir, before you said that you were talking with other folks from the SIG about how COPS, for example, is handling this. One thought regarding that: if you, I mean, I understand what they are saying, that if you only change etcd, for example, they will ignore that. So it's completely up to the user to change the configuration in a way in which you can then apply that. But my main wonder here is, how do you handle an upgrade of Kubernetes along with that? So in our case, for example, we want to bump Kubernetes as a whole, and this might include etcd, maybe not, but it usually includes etcd as well. So we want to bump everything in this configuration file. We write the whole configuration file for kubeadm. We write the tag for the cluster, for the Kubernetes version, and also the etcd one. If this was to be ignored, then we would bump everything Kubernetes, but not etcd. We would have to patch that on our own. At what moment? Before trying to do the upgrade? After? It's kind of tricky, you know?
It's especially tricky if we one day bump to etcd version 4 and there are incompatibilities between the API server that we just bumped and etcd. So the idea is to bump the control plane first and then bump etcd if you are breaking down the process in that way. But imagine that the new API server, so the API server should be backwards compatible with the old etcd in this case. So imagine that you release 120 API server, you bump to this version, and now it supports etcd 4.0, which is like maybe completely different. But the way Kubernetes is going to do that, they are going to handle the backwards compatibility with the version 3 of etcd as well. So you're going to have an old etcd version, and you have to also update etcd like a separate step to be 4.0 at this point. But I see the problem here is that we have to document this manual step because users are not going to know how to do it. Apparently, COPS is completely delegated this to the users. In kubeadm, if we do that, maybe we are going to get some complaints. People asking, "Hey, I have a custom tag. How do I upgrade etcd? Like when is the right time and things like that."
I mean, from my point of view, if we have this whole discussion that is aside of this config flag that we should probably remove at some point. So, but assuming that we have the config flag, I would just keep the same logic in the sense that I will just trust what the user does, right? And if we find reports of people, using etcd versions that don't match our expected version, then this is an unsupported setup, right? So we cannot really support that. You went on your own way, let's say. But if you are using this in a way, for example, as we are using a different schema of tagging, but we are effectively using the same etcd real version that kubeadm or Kubernetes expects. So there is no issue in that sense because it's the same etcd version, but it has a different tagging schema, let's say.
Yeah, this is where my proposal came around basically this is the logic. I pretty much dumped this like a row out of if branches and conditions. How can we manage upgrades for users? If the versions are new, we're just going to assume that the same image, the metadata for the vendor exists in the image repository. So how can I give a good example here? So imagine this is okay.
So there's ways to do this by breaking up the well-defined version string into subcomponents and allowing, if you had templating, which you don't really have, so that you could allow the variable override of an entire fully qualified string naming for every single parameter that makes up the entire name of an image artifact, it'd be possible to do that. We don't currently do that.
Yeah, basically I proposed like standardizing the tags we do for components yesterday. And I said this to Justin and Daniel, like maybe if we standardize this, maybe we can, template the vendor, template the revision. But they said that like COPS is already doing something else. So we are kind of drifting into not standardizing things. COPS is doing this complete delegation of, if the tag is custom, we don't do anything with it. So I was wondering whether we should follow the COPS example or diverge. My preference is going to be to follow what COPS is doing. We already have something like that in kubeadm, essentially. Ignoring tags if they are custom.
I'm missing something here because what is the point of providing an image tag if every time you try to configure that it gets ignored and then it doesn't do anything? I mean, shouldn't then be a Boolean like don't handle this, don't handle etcd? I think that's weird.
Yeah, but the problem with the custom tag is that if it's way too custom, if it's not following a standard, we don't know how to upgrade the version inside the tag itself. We can upgrade this part, but we don't know what the user has added here if it's not standardized.
So I think that this is going to be handled by the library that the API machinery provides us as a pre-release version. It's kind of a hack, but at least we can compare multiple releases by certain vendors. So for example, if we have the same sim version that is, in this case, 3.4.4 dash vendor dot 1 and 2, And if we have those two tags, we are going to be able to compare them with what we already have in place. The problem here is that we are basically using the etcd client API to fetch a pure sim version, which is going to be 3.4.4. And the API machinery library is pretty much going to treat that as a final release, while the vendor appended part is usually treated as a pre-release. And we get into the situation where always the already deployed version in like as a stacked etcd version is going to be the latest one, as long as the sim version of it is the same.
Yeah, I think everybody agrees that we should stop comparing to the etcd cluster version. This is something they had. So maybe we should define the action items here. Let me go back to the list here. So this one is pretty simple. We just, so our same version library is going to tolerate these as long as we don't compare to the etcd cluster version. We're going to have good comparisons between -0 and -1. So first action item is to stop comparing to the client, I think, to the client server version, I guess. Then what we should do, then is this question: what do we want to change the existing behavior? Which, to my understanding, the existing behavior is we don't upgrade etcd if in the cluster configuration we have a custom tag. Is this correct?
I'm kind of I don't have a good answer to that. I would say from my point of view, we parse the version. It should be a Semver version. If it's not a Semver version, we just ignore it. I mean, it needs to be a Semver version. Then we compare major, minor, and patch. And if that matches our expectation, then it's fine. I mean, I would just ignore the metadata part of it. And then I would just go ahead and write whatever I was passed. I mean, if I'm inferring this from our own logic, then we compare to that. If it's newer, what we are supposed to run, we upgrade. Otherwise, we write a warning or something. If something was passed and is not Semver, I don't think we can do anything. Maybe just move forward and write whatever we were told, but we can write a message. This is not Semver. We cannot compare anything. Just go ahead and this is your warning. And then if they are Semver, again, check the new version with the previous one and compare the major, minor, and patch level and just ignore the others.
Well, I just wrote something similar here, to be honest. It's slightly different, but it's a proposal for managing the upgrades. Based on the existing image, we can still decide whether this is supposed to be upgradable. The issue I have here is that we're changing the behavior of kubeadm with these assumptions, or what you propose right now. But also, something to note here is that we are already using metadata, because this -0 is the revisions that we have in GCR are already metadata. So we cannot ignore metadata today.
And the funny thing here is that if we actually decide to upgrade the default version to -1 in some release, this is not going to upgrade etcd.
You mean, but this is going to download the latest -1 image?
Only to prefetch it, but I don't think it's going to be upgrading it, simply because it won't say it's an it will say basically it's an older version that you're trying to upgrade to, and it won't do that.
Okay. I think we should stop here with this discussion. Maybe I can draft a PR and just discuss these two potential issues on the PR. I don't think we're getting anywhere with this. So in terms of Rafa's PR, which is kind of adjacent to this, Rossi, I wanted to get your feedback. Like, should we allow the PR? What are your concerns? We are having separate topics here, and this is like a different change. It feels like.
Yeah, the like what my concern here is basically that we are sort of diverging between minus minus config and the config that we actually get from the config map. And we basically, in the config that we get from the config map, we override the image tag of etcd unconditionally with whatever kubeadm thinks is the most appropriate etcd version. And we use this to upgrade to, and then we store this into the like image tag is specifically noted in the API documentation that it's basically a field that kubeadm promises it won't fill in. And furthermore, if a user goes in and modifies the config directly in the config map and runs kubeadm upgrade apply, his image tag is going to be overridden by this version. So the only way to actually apply a different image tag is to basically use minus minus config.
I agree with Ross' concerns. I completely missed that part. That that it's overriding the image tag on the configuration, on the uploaded configuration. So maybe I just should close this pull request, and this should be fixed with the solution that we will provide to the previous discussion that we had. So maybe we should do something global to fix this issue altogether. So this was just a proposal, but I think we can just close this one.
Okay, so a question here, how do you upgrade etcd in SUSE if, for instance, we completely disallow this PR to merge? How are you going to upgrade the etcd on the control planes?
So right now, it depends. It really depends. For example, if we are bumping Kubernetes as a whole, then it isn't much of a problem. If we only want to bump etcd and the change is only on the revision, then is when we have a problem, because we cannot really upgrade only etcd. For example, this has happened. So right now we would have to patch the cluster configuration and run kubeadm upgrade node on all the nodes. That would be the solution right now.
So that kind of falls into a category of problems that's a little bit different. Like, we never really intended to do patch-wise revisions for, like, say, CDE things directly from kubeadm. That might be a scenario for the kubeadm operator to do a cluster-wide patching, but like the kubeadm operator is very nascent. I think expanding the scope of doing patch updates for kubeadm is something that we haven't really talked much about. The user story is interesting because it's definitely a legit user story. You have a CVE, you only want to update one individual component across your entire environment. How do you do that with the tooling we have today? And the answer is you need to rev everything. And that's not practical necessarily for some people where they only want to update an individual component.
Yes, and apparently we already do not support the Google revisions, so we have to implement a fix for that. Yeah, the operator is interesting. I think it's going to solve a lot of our problems, but you know, there's also this. We have to document it and we have to get it ready. But in the meantime, I think we should also get kubeadm itself to be tolerable for these upgrade issues that we're seeing.
Maybe I'm wrong with that. I mean, the kubeadm operator is going to reuse most of this logic, if not all, right? So it will probably have this issue as well, or?
Yeah, it will. Like it would wholesale upgrade things though. So if you did like a 117.0 to a 117.1, all the componentry would be rolled out as part of that release, which is probably a better scenario anyways, to be honest, versus doing an individual patch-wise modification. but it would do it in a staggered fashion, right? So it would do it in a controlled fashion. So I don't necessarily think that we'd have that scenario, but it'd be more holistic than doing an individual patch update. Because usually when you do a qual, any type of qual, even upstream, it quals the whole stack, because one minor change in a component can ripple across the stack.
Yeah, that is
Then
true.
I have another question, Ross, regarding that. In order to fetch the current etcd tag, you mentioned that you have a paths for taking that from the pod list, and then also Lubomir commented that we can fetch that from the local machine, the etcd local manifest. Maybe. Do you think maybe it's better to read the local manifest because we are not open to API server being down or the list, not being yet reconciled or mirrored?
To my understanding, Rosti's proposal pretty much means that we don't have to fetch any versions from anywhere, because only from the custom configuration, and if it's custom, if it's a custom tag in there, we decide to upgrade. We don't have to fetch it.
That's only like one part of the thing. So right now the check is like we get the current version. That's basically what kubeadm thinks is most appropriate to have, and then it will query the etcd client to get the etcd version of like that's running right now. So what I'm proposing is to basically from one side, the version that kubeadm is striving to upgrade to should be taken by the image tag field, or if the image tag field is empty, from the built-in version inside of kubeadm. That's the version to upgrade to. The version that is right now running on the etcd nodes is should be taken from like the static pod, and more precisely from the tag that is basically in the etcd container. So basically, yeah, I just did a quick solution that is just using the client right now to just fetch the tag of all etcd instances. That also allows me to replicate the behavior of where we actually compare all of the tags on all of the running etcd instances, and try and error out if we actually have mismatch somewhere. But yeah, we can just use the local static pod file and just deserialize that and get the image tag from there.
A question here: why should we even probe static? Why should we even probe pods for the etcd version? If the user has customized the tag in custom configuration, this means we can assume that the running version is inside this tag. If they haven't customized this tag, we can assume that the etcd version is inside the constant map.
We cannot be sure that the thing that we actually downloaded from the config map is the same thing that we are actually running. So a user could have actually gone through and with kubectl just change only the image tag there, and then rerun kubectl upgrade node to just upgrade that, just upgrade the etcd or something like this.
Are we checking the version of the running API server before assuming it's the same version we want to, if it's the same version that we want to upgrade from?
I don't think so, but I need to check.
That is my point. We are not checking the other components, and we are doing the special checks for etcd. It feels redundant to me. I mean, it feels like the right thing to do. Check what is actually running but we are already not doing this for the other components.
Yeah, probably then the best solution is to just upgrade to whatever this version is, like whether like image stack or what's built inside of kubeadm. But I think that the only thing that this check is doing is to just skip upgrade if it's not needed.
Okay.
So one question from my side. Do we agree, despite the specific implementation and so on, do we agree that if you pass a config flag with a certain configuration, kubeadm will apply that unconditionally, maybe writing some warnings, maybe doing, something, but do we agree on that, that if I pass a config, kubeadm should apply that?
Yeah, it should be the same, like minus config and the thing that we actually stored in the config map, these things should be the same. So if you just pass the image tag inside of a config file and you supply that with minus config, it should be upgraded to that version. Or if you choose to just edit in place the config map, then again, it should be upgraded to that version. It's basically, it's a user who have gone through and did this change in cluster configuration that is going to be applied. And like the image tag and the image repository fields, they're intended to be used by users to override the kubeadm defaults.
All right, so I'm going to draft a PR. My question here is, should we close Rafa's PR right now?
I'm fine if we want to do that. I can also adapt it so we we don't change the image tag, but rely on the defaulting if it's empty. I can try to change that, but if you want to handle that, Lubomir, I'm fine closing it, really.
I wanted to handle the version checks mostly. So the config bits, I mean, probably better for you to show what you mean in this PR if you want to adapt it. I wanted to draft something related to these parts because this is what the users are seeing right now, most of them. This bug.
Okay. Okay. So what I will do is after our discussions I will try to adapt it and think about it, and I will ping you back. Thank you.
All right, let's move to the next one. We spoke a lot about this issue already. Misleading warning on join control plane. So this is a low priority issue, but it's getting annoying because the Costa API saw it and I got a report from a user the other day outside of Costa API as well. The problem is that, so back in the, I mean, where do I start with this one? We have a join configuration that can include control plane field. In the control plane field, you can add some bits. But if you do kubeadm join without the -- control plane, you're going to get a warning. This is the warning. It means that the settings are going to be ignored, but that's actually not true. This warning is false because later in the code, we actually rewrote the configuration from disk. So it's kind of, the sequence of events is very confusing in our source code. And I guess I should send a PR for this. But I made some proposals. Rosti, you had some objections. Basically, I proposed the following in a commit somewhere. Let's go to open this commit. I wanted to get your opinion again quickly on this. Fabrizio is not around. Ideally, I should have gotten his. So basically, you propose that we should have a separate substructure that is the join control plane substructure, and we should populate the flags inside of this instead of populating the flags inside of the main join configuration, right?
Yeah, at least that's what we are using in several other places inside of kubeadm, and it's much more easy to do that way. For example, you can see what we do with like the join configuration with regards to the discovery substructures.
Mm-hmm.
Basically have a couple of like different substructures, and we attach the one that's needed.
I see. The problem there, to my understanding, is that we have to manually default all the flags. We cannot use the API schema to default these substructures.
Yeah, I think that we cannot do that, but then again, with the joint control plane here, this basically does not require you to default anything prior to the actual attachment. Once you attach it to the rest of the configuration, you can certainly perform a defaulting on it.
I see. So it's also only the bind port that is defaulted there anyway.
Yeah.
So basically, you're proposing that quickly going through this PR because I want to adapt it to get rid of this warning. You're proposing, instead of creating a copy of the whole config, to basically create a joint control plane instance.
Yeah, I think that there is comment somewhere here.
Yes. And then compare basically the custom substructure to an empty one.
Yeah.
And then I guess I only have to default the bind port from our constants, and that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a quick solution. This is going to work. All right, I want to send a PR for that as well because the warning is confusing for users of the config at the moment. Apparently, we don't have that many users that use this. Users just pass flags. All right. Basically, I had a discussion with a user yesterday. To my understanding, he was fairly unhappy because we still don't have upgrade apply phases. And I know that Marek was probably busy with internal work at this point, so we couldn't deliver the 118 upgrade apply phases. I just wanted to mention this, that maybe, like, because we have been dragging this for too much time already, maybe next cycle we should just, I can take it, but with the kubeadm move, if it's going to happen in 118, it's going to be very hard for me. But I want to mention something that we ignored at some point. So basically, the user said, hey, in our discussion here, the user said, hey, if a kubeproxy config map does not exist, why don't you just ignore the upgrade of kubeproxy? And I said, hey, we already discussed this. It was proposed. In fact, I proposed this, but it was rejected because the kube upgrade apply phases were going to solve that. And I think we maybe, because it's a much less work, we should just revisit this particular bit.
Sorry, all I can say, Lubomir, is that I know Marek is working on that. That's all he told me. So, but besides that, once we have the base, we can split the work on the phases. I don't know about this specific one, about doing this, but we should probably split that work. Yeah,
it feels to me before the phases, we can just apply this fix. It's not going to be too complex. Rossi, do you remember the details there? I think we had a problem with deciding whether the config map is existing, something we embed the component config inside the other config. That was the issue. There was no way to check if it's new.
So what was the exact problem here?
This was the user is trying to skip kubeproxy on upgrade apply.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I think that there is no possibility right now to tell whether actually right now it's going to try and download the config, but if the config map is missing, it's going to just produce a defaulted kubeproxy. And at the end of the apply phase, it's going to just reapply a full kube proxy with that defaulted config map. So
isn't kubeproxy, sorry for cutting in, isn't kubeproxy part of kubedns and it's just a container and you have to deploy it as a pod and that's it? Unless you're using your DNS, certainly.
No, they're separate components.
Okay, sorry.
So Rossi, do you think we can compare, similar to the previous ticket we were talking about, do you think we can compare an empty proxy configuration or something like that to just say, hey, the user, actually we cannot do that. So again, asking the question, why, if we fetch the kubeproxy config map, if it doesn't exist, can we assume that kubeproxy is not deployed? Again, the same question.
Depends, actually. If we actually try and supply the normal fetching mechanism with some sort of a flag, it's going to be like pretty easy to just don't generate new config, but only on upgrade, because we use the same code during, say, init, and during init we are actually relying on generating a defaulted config without if a user did not supply a new version. So what we are actually kind of like, we just need to split the code slightly. So, and also another thing is that almost nowhere inside of kubeadm we do some like new checks about the missing kubeproxy configuration. So we basically, even in the case where we don't have a kubeproxy installed, we rely on having a dummy configuration that we carry around just to not step on a bunch of nil panics.
I have a question here. Maybe it's a crazy idea, but just let me throw this in. What if it's not an API? I mean, it's not adding something to our API, not a Boolean, nothing like that, just an annotation that we can give an answer to our users now. And this annotation we'll get rid of it when we have the phases. So it's like you can use an annotation, so we skip the proxy add-on if the kube proxy, if you have this annotation, and then we will just drop the annotation if you have it, and we will just, I mean, you will have to use the phases.
Well, the problem with annotations is that once you get an annotation, it's pretty hard to get rid of it at some point. So even if it's temporary, it's going to be like too hard to get rid of. Another possibility to tackle this, and I think that in the future we are going to tackle it through this, is using like a list of add-ons that we supply to be enabled by kubeadm or the add-on manager during init. So this is going to live somewhere under the cluster configuration and be like probably just a list of add-ons or whatever the cluster add-ons folks actually come up with for their configuration. But this is like pretty early to think about like the exact details there. So right now, the only feasible option to me is to just do like implement upgrade apply phases and allow users to just skip the kube proxy or DNS or whatever phase they like.
I'm not convinced this is the only option. It's the right option, definitely, but I don't think we have that much of a problem with the kubeproxy config map missing. We had a discussion about this. I just have to try it, I guess. I'm not convinced that if the kubeproxy config map is missing, I would assume that there's no kubeproxy. So I'm not sure if if I wrap this in a client call, I'm not seeing a problem here. I don't think it's going to pass.
It's going to pass simply because we are using a function that is going to just check if the config map is existing. If it's not existing, it's going to generate a sort of defaulted kubeproxy component config, and you will never know about it. And this is basically the same function we use during upgrade or init or whenever we actually try and load component configs.
Well, yes, but I'm trying to say if I wrap this call inside another check, not the contents of this particular function.
Yeah, you want to basically just check for the config map existence.
Outside of this call.
Yeah, that's like sort of a hacky solution that's probably going to work.
Yeah, that was my point, because we have been dragging this for so much, for a very long time. I started thinking that maybe we should just add this at this point. So people are not skipping core DNS, but they are skipping kubeproxy definitely. And I think we should just inject this hack at this point until we have the phases. The phases are not clear to me. I don't think if 119 is going to still be the release for them.
Yeah, I think that we can actually do that, but let's ensure that it has a massive to-do command there, that this is just a temporary solution and should be removed once we actually have either phases or like the list that I'm talking about.
Sure. So by discussing these topics, it feels to me like I already created like 3 action items for me. So a question here is, does anybody want to take this particular one?
So I think that I can certainly help on the etcd tag stuff, simply because I have a bunch of code that I tested last week.
Okay.
I can take it, no problem. I mean, if somebody else wants to take it, you are free. But if nobody else wants, I can take it.
Okay, so Rossi, maybe you can work on the HCD bits that I promised to send a PR for that. Maybe you can also handle the revision to work. And I want to send a PR for this one, for the kubeproxy. And what else we spoke about? So I guess I also have to send the PR for the other one, which is the misleading warning. Okay, I'm going to take the misleading warning in kubeproxy, and you guys can work on the HCD bits, I guess. All right. Topics.
I'm sorry, Luomir. Are you taking the one about checking the kubeproxy config map as well?
Yeah, I'm going to take the kubeproxy issue, the misleading warning about control plane join.
Okay.
And you guys can tackle the HCD issues.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, any other agenda topics for today? We have 8 minutes. I don't think we should do issue trash today. There's not enough time. I just wanted to give a quick update on what I've been working on. Rossi, you unmuted. Do you want to have a comment?
No, I haven't simply muted myself.
All right. I have been working on the kubeadm release and test and whatever tools for the build automation. And I'm going to show a demo of this at some point. Just wanted to give a quick update about this, but it has been a successful experiment thus far. I also implemented a way for every time Kubernetes releases, we can also have a local release with artifacts. So it builds artifacts for different platforms, and it can also have release notes in here, but I forgot to send PRs with release notes. But yeah, it has been pretty good thus far. And today I'm going to wait for the release, and hopefully, here is going to appear a new release automatically managed by the tooling. I'm going to demo this in front of SIG architecture, SIG release, and also this group, but this is going to happen later in the cycle. I just also have to update the cap because it has become a bit of a mess. Too many comments. Oops. So that's it. Anybody have last minute agendas? All right, we can end 5 minutes earlier. Thanks everybody. See you again next week when we are going to do the planning session. Bye.